Captain Sarah Mitchell sat alone in the officers' mess hall at Davis Air Force Base in Arizona, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Through the window, she could see the flight line where a dozen A-10 Thunderbolt aircraft sat like sleeping dragons in the desert sun. One of them was hers, or at least it used to be. "Hey, Mitchell," a voice called from across the room. "Heard they're grounding you. Finally figured out women can't handle real combat, huh?" Sarah didn't turn around. She knew the voice belonged to Captain Brad Holcomb, a hotshot pilot who'd been making her life miserable since she'd arrived at the base 6 months ago. He flew F-16s and thought that made him superior to everyone who flew the slower, uglier A-10s. The fact that Sarah was a woman just gave him extra ammunition. "Leave her alone, Holcomb," another voice said. It was Lieutenant Tom Chen, one of the few pilots who'd treated Sarah with basic respect. But his defense was half-hearted, and she could hear the doubt in his voice. Sarah finally stood up, her 5'6" frame rigid with controlled anger. She was 32 years old, had been flying for the Air Force for 8 years, and had completed 2 tours in the Middle East. She'd saved lives, taken out enemy positions, and earned her call sign Iron Eagle through skill and courage. But none of that seemed to matter here. "I'm not grounded," she said quietly, turning to face Holcomb. "I'm being reassigned." "To what, a desk job?" Holcomb laughed, and a few other pilots joined in. "Face it, Mitchell, you're washed up. That incident last month proved you can't handle the pressure." Sarah's jaw tightened. The incident he was referring to had been a training mission where she'd aborted a simulated bombing run because her instruments showed a malfunction. The mechanics had found nothing wrong with the aircraft afterward, and her commanding officer, Colonel Robert Drake, had written it up as pilot error. He'd called her overly cautious and emotionally unstable in his report. "The instruments were faulty," Sarah said, keeping her voice level. "The gauges showed." "They showed nothing," Holcomb interrupted. "You panicked. It happens to women under stress. Everyone knows it." Sarah felt her hands ball into fists, but she kept them at her sides. Getting into a fight would only prove their point. Instead, she walked past Holcomb and his cronies, heading for the door. "Where are you going?" Holcomb called after her. "To cry in the bathroom." She didn't answer. She stepped out into the blistering Arizona heat and walked across the tarmac toward the hangar where her A-10 was being serviced. The plane looked like a beast, ugly, ungainly, with its strange nose and engines mounted high on the fuselage. But Sarah loved it. The A-10 was tough, reliable, and built to take damage and keep flying. It reminded her of herself. "Captain Mitchell." Sarah stopped and turned. Colonel Drake was walking toward her, his face set in the stern expression he always wore around her. He was 55, a career officer who'd made it clear he thought women had no place in combat aviation. "Sir," Sarah said, snapping to attention. "At ease." Drake stopped a few feet away, his arms crossed. "I suppose you've heard about your reassignment." "Yes, sir, though I haven't received official orders yet." "You will tomorrow morning." Drake's eyes were cold. "You're being transferred to a training unit at Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota. You'll be teaching new pilots basic flight procedures." Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the gut. Ellsworth was a backwater posting, the kind of place they sent pilots who were being quietly pushed out of the service. Teaching basic procedures meant she'd never fly combat missions again. "Sir, with respect, I don't understand. My record—" "Your record shows increasing instability," Drake cut her off. "The aborted mission last month, your difficulty working with your fellow pilots, several complaints about your attitude." "Complaints from whom?" "That's not relevant. What matters is that you're not fitting in here, Mitchell. This reassignment is for your own good." Sarah knew better than to argue. Drake had already made up his mind, probably months ago. Maybe even before she'd arrived at Davis. She'd heard the rumors that Drake had been opposed to women in combat roles since the beginning, that he'd actively worked to undermine female pilots in his command. "When do I leave?" she asked. 2 weeks. Use the time to get your affairs in order." Drake started to walk away, then paused. "And Mitchell, I'd suggest you think seriously about your future in the Air Force. Not everyone is cut out for military life." Sarah watched him go, feeling a wave of despair wash over her. She'd worked so hard to get here. She'd been at the top of her class in flight school, had excelled in every assignment, had proven herself again and again. But it didn't matter. They'd decided she didn't belong, and there was nothing she could do about it. She walked into the hangar where her A-10 sat, its titanium bathtub cockpit gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The crew chief, a grizzled master sergeant named Ray Hoskins, was working on the landing gear. "Hey, Captain," Hoskins said, looking up. "Heard the news, I'm real sorry." "Thanks, Ray." Sarah ran her hand along the plane's fuselage. "Think I could take her up one last time." Hoskins frowned. "Not sure that's a good idea, ma'am. Colonel Drake put a note in the maintenance log saying the plane needs a full systems check before anyone flies it again." "Another systems check? We just did one last week." "I know, but orders are orders." Hoskins wiped his hands on a rag. "Between you and me, there's nothing wrong with this bird. She's in perfect condition, but Drake's been real particular about your plane lately." Sarah felt a chill despite the heat. "What do you mean?" "Just, he's been coming by, checking the logs, asking questions, almost like he's looking for something to be wrong." Hoskins lowered his voice. "Look, I probably shouldn't say this, but I've been working on planes for 23 years. I know when someone's trying to set up a pilot. You watch yourself, Captain." Sarah nodded slowly. She'd suspected Drake was working against her, but having it confirmed made it real. And if he was willing to mess with maintenance logs and create false incidents, what else might he do? "Thanks for the warning, Ray." That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment off base, staring at the photographs on her wall. Her father in his Air Force uniform from Vietnam. Her mother, who'd worked as a nurse for 30 years. Her younger brother, a Marine serving in Japan. Her family had always served. It was in their blood. Her phone rang. It was her mother. "Hi, Mom." "Sarah, honey, I heard about the transfer. Are you okay?" Word traveled fast in military families. "I'm fine, it's not what I wanted." "I know, sweetheart, but maybe it's for the best. You've been under so much stress." Sarah closed her eyes. Even her mother doubted her. "Mom, they're pushing me out because I'm a woman. You know that, right?" There was a long pause. "Sarah, I'm sure that's not." "It is, Mom. Drake has been undermining me since day one. The other pilots treat me like a joke, and now they're sending me to the middle of nowhere to teach basic flight procedures. Sometimes we have to accept that things don't work out the way we planned." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I have to go, Mom. I'll call you later." She hung up before her mother could respond. She sat in the darkness of her apartment, feeling more alone than she'd ever felt in her life. But Sarah Mitchell hadn't survived 2 combat tours by giving up. She'd faced enemy fire, mechanical failures, and near-death experiences. She'd earned her place in that cockpit through blood, sweat, and determination. They wanted her gone, fine, but she wasn't going to leave quietly, and she wasn't going to let them break her. Tomorrow she'd start fighting back. She just had to figure out how. The next morning, Sarah received her official transfer orders. She was to report to Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota on the 1st of next month. 2 weeks to pack up her life and disappear. She spent the morning sorting through paperwork in her office, a small room she shared with 3 other pilots. None of them were there. They were all out flying missions while she'd been effectively grounded. The silence felt oppressive. Around noon, her phone rang. It was Colonel Drake's secretary, asking her to report to his office immediately. Sarah walked across the base with a growing sense of unease. Drake had already given her the bad news. What more could he possibly want? When she arrived, Drake wasn't alone. Sitting in the chairs across from his desk were 2 men in civilian clothes. They had that unmistakable look of intelligence officers, bland faces, neutral expressions, watchful eyes. "Captain Mitchell, have a seat," Drake said, gesturing to an empty chair. Sarah sat, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. "This is Agent Morrison and Agent Burke from the Defense Intelligence Agency," Drake continued. "They have a matter they'd like to discuss with you." Morrison leaned forward. He was in his 40s with short gray hair and a scar above his left eyebrow. "Captain Mitchell, we've been reviewing your service record. Very impressive." "Thank you, sir." 2 combat tour, multiple commendations. You're one of the most experienced A-10 pilots currently in service. Morrison paused. "Which is why we're here." Sarah glanced at Drake, who was staring at his desk, his expression unreadable. Burke spoke up. He was younger, maybe 35, with dark hair and sharp features. "We have a situation developing in a remote area of northern Mexico. A terrorist cell has established a stronghold in the mountains near the Arizona border. They're heavily armed and planning an attack on American soil. Mexican authorities can't or won't deal with it, Morrison added. And we can't send in a full military operation without causing an international incident. What we need is a single aircraft, flying low and fast, to take out their compound before they can execute their attack. Sarah's pulse quickened. An A-10 mission. Exactly. The terrain is rough, deep canyons, high peaks, unpredictable winds. It requires a pilot with exceptional skill and nerves of steel. Morrison locked eyes with her. We want you to fly it. For a moment, Sarah couldn't breathe. They were offering her exactly what she wanted, a real mission, a chance to prove herself. But something felt wrong. Why me? She asked carefully. There are dozens of qualified A-10 pilots on this base. Because you're being transferred anyway, Burke said bluntly. If something goes wrong, if the mission is compromised, you're already on your way out. The political fallout would be minimal. There it was, the truth. They weren't choosing her because she was the best. They were choosing her because she was expendable. What are the mission parameters? Sarah asked, keeping her voice steady. Morrison pulled out a folder and opened it. The compound is located here in a narrow canyon approximately 60 miles south of the border. Intelligence indicates 20 to 30 hostiles, armed with machine guns and possibly surface-to-air missiles. You'll fly in at dawn, when visibility is poor and they're least likely to be expecting an attack. You'll be going in alone, Burke added. No support, no backup. Radio silence until you're clear of Mexican airspace. If you're shot down, we can't extract you. The Mexican government will deny knowledge of the compound and will deny any involvement in the attack. Sarah studied the map. The canyon was narrow, maybe 100 feet wide in some places. The walls rose over 1,000 feet on either side. Flying an A-10 through there would be like threading a needle while riding a bull. It's a suicide mission, she said quietly. It's a high-risk mission, Morrison corrected. But you've flown in worse conditions. Iraq, Afghanistan, those weren't exactly safe either. Those were sanctioned military operations with full support. This is, Sarah struggled to find the words. This is using me as a disposable asset. Drake finally spoke. Captain Mitchell, you have a choice. You can accept this mission, and if you succeed, your transfer will be reconsidered. You might even earn a commendation, or you can refuse and report to South Dakota as scheduled. Sarah looked at each man in turn. Drake with his barely concealed contempt, Morrison and Burke with their cold calculation. They thought they had her trapped. Take the suicide mission or accept professional exile. But as she looked at the map again, she saw something they apparently hadn't noticed. The canyon might be narrow, but it opened up into a wider valley just beyond the compound. If she could make it through the initial approach, she'd have room to maneuver. And the A-10 was designed to take damage and keep flying. It was ugly and slow, but it was tough as hell. She could do this, and if she did, she'd prove to every one of them that they'd been wrong about her. I'll take the mission, she said. Morrison nodded. Good, you'll fly out at 0500 tomorrow. Mission briefing is at 2200 tonight. Any questions? Just one. If I complete this mission successfully, I want my transfer canceled. I want to stay at Davis and continue flying combat missions. Drake's face darkened. That's not. Those are my terms, Sarah interrupted. I'm risking my life on a mission you're too afraid to send your golden boys on. If I succeed, I earn the right to stay. Morrison and Burke exchanged glances. Finally, Morrison nodded. Agreed. Complete the mission and we'll see what we can do about your transfer. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was something. Sarah stood. Then I'll see you at the briefing tonight. As she left the office, she heard Drake's voice behind her, low and angry. This is a mistake. She's going to get herself killed. Maybe, Morrison replied. But if she succeeds, she'll have earned her place. And if she doesn't, well, problem solved either way. Sarah kept walking, her hands trembling with suppressed rage. They wanted her dead. That was the real mission here. Send the troublesome female pilot on an impossible task and hope she doesn't come back. But Sarah Mitchell had survived this long by being smarter and tougher than anyone expected, and she wasn't about to let them win. That afternoon, she went to the hangar to check on her A-10. Ray Hoskins was still working on the systems check that Drake had ordered. How's she looking, Ray? Sarah asked. Perfect, like I told you, but I did find something interesting. Hoskins led her to the weapons systems panel. Someone's been messing with the targeting computer. Small adjustments, nothing that would show up on a routine check, but enough to throw off your accuracy by a few degrees. Sarah felt ice in her veins. Sabotage. Can't prove it, but if you'd flown a combat mission with these settings, your shots would have missed their targets. You'd look incompetent, maybe even get yourself killed. Can you fix it? Already did, but Captain, you need to be real careful. Someone wants you to fail, and they're willing to risk your life to make it happen. Sarah nodded slowly. She'd suspected Drake was working against her, but this was beyond professional prejudice. This was attempted murder. Thanks, Ray. I need you to do me a favor. Tonight, after the base quiets down, I want you to do one more check on this bird. Make sure everything is perfect. And I mean everything. Weapons, avionics, fuel systems, all of it. You got it, Captain. This bird will be ready to fly. The mission briefing that night was short and cold. Morrison and Burke laid out the attack plan, flying low through the canyon, destroy the compound with the A-10's 30mm cannon and Maverick missiles, and get out before the enemy could respond. Simple in theory, nearly impossible in practice. None of the other pilots were at the briefing. This was Black Ops, deniable, secret. If Sarah died, she'd die alone and no one would know the truth. After the briefing, she went back to her apartment and tried to sleep. But her mind kept racing, running through the mission parameters, calculating angles and distances, thinking about everything that could go wrong. Around midnight, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. They don't expect you to come back. Prove them wrong. Sarah stared at the message. Who had sent it? Tom Chen, Ray Hoskins, someone else who saw what was happening. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she wasn't completely alone. Someone was rooting for her. She typed back a single word, Roger. Then she closed her eyes and forced herself to rest. Tomorrow, she'd either prove herself once and for all or die trying. Either way, she'd go down fighting. Sarah woke at 400 hours, her body already tense with anticipation. She'd barely slept, her mind running through the mission parameters over and over. But she felt alert, focused, ready. She dressed quickly in her flight suit, double-checking every pocket and strap. The suit was worn and comfortable, broken in through hundreds of hours in the cockpit. It felt like a second skin. The base was quiet as she drove to the flight line. The desert sky was still dark, with just a hint of gray on the eastern horizon. In an hour, the sun would rise. By then, she'd either be deep into Mexican airspace or dead. Ray Hoskins was waiting by her A-10, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. He looked tired. He'd probably been up all night doing the final checks she'd requested. Morning, Captain. She's ready for you. I went over every system twice. This bird is in perfect shape. Thanks, Ray. I owe you one. Just come back alive, ma'am. That'll be payment enough. Hoskins hesitated, then added, I put a little something extra in the survival kit, just in case. Sarah nodded, understanding. If she went down in Mexico, she'd be on her own. Any edge could mean the difference between life and death. She climbed up to the cockpit and settled into the seat, running through her pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. Everything looked good. The targeting computer showed perfect calibration. The weapons systems were armed and ready. The fuel tanks were full. Colonel Drake appeared below, along with Morrison and Burke. They looked up at her with expressions that were hard to read in the dim light. Captain Mitchell, Drake's voice came through her headset. You are cleared for takeoff. Maintain radio silence until you cross back into U.S. airspace. If you encounter any difficulties, you are to abort the mission and return immediately. Is that understood? Understood, sir. Sarah didn't mention that aborting wouldn't be an option once she entered that canyon. It was a one-way trip, forward to the target or down in flames. Good luck, Captain, Morrison said. It sounded almost sincere. Sarah didn't respond. She finished her pre-flight, started the engines, and felt the familiar rumble of the A-10's twin turbofans. The plane might be ugly, but that sound was beautiful. She taxied to the runway, received clearance from the tower, and pushed the throttles forward. The A-10 accelerated slowly. It wasn't built for speed. But when she pulled back on the stick, it lifted into the air with solid, dependable power. Sarah climbed to 1,000 feet and turned south, toward Mexico. Behind her, Davis Air Force Base disappeared into the darkness. Ahead, the first light of dawn was beginning to paint the sky. She flew low, staying off radar, following the terrain south across the Arizona desert and over the border. The landscape below was rugged and empty, Mountains, canyons, scrubland. No towns, no roads, no signs of human life. Perfect country for hiding a terrorist cell. As she approached the target area, Sarah dropped even lower, skimming just 100 feet above the ground. The mountains rose up around her, dark and jagged. She could see the canyon ahead, a narrow slash in the rock. This was it, no turning back now. Sarah took a deep breath and aimed the nose of her into the canyon mouth. The walls closed in on either side, so close she felt like she could reach out and touch them. The light was dim here, the sun not yet high enough to penetrate to the canyon floor. She flew by instruments and instinct, her hands steady on the controls. The A-10 responded beautifully, holding its line despite the turbulent air currents swirling through the canyon. Then she saw it, the compound. A cluster of buildings built into the canyon wall, camouflaged to blend with the rock, just as the intelligence had indicated. But there was more, much more. Sarah's heart sank as she took in the full picture. The intelligence had said 20 to 30 hostiles. What she was seeing looked like 100 or more. Vehicles, heavy weapons, even what looked like anti-aircraft guns positioned on the surrounding ridges. This wasn't a terrorist cell. This was a full military installation. And she was flying straight into it. Before she could react, tracers lit up the canyon, machine gun fire from multiple positions. The A-10 shuddered as rounds struck the fuselage, but the titanium armor held. They'd been waiting for her. It was a trap. Sarah's mind raced. She could try to abort, pull up, and get out of the canyon. But the anti-aircraft guns would tear her apart. Her only chance was to complete the attack run, destroy as much as she could, and hope there was a way out on the other side. She armed her weapons and lined up on the main compound building. The 30 cannon roared to life, spitting out depleted uranium rounds at 70 per second. She walked the fire across the building, watching it disintegrate under the onslaught. More tracers filled the air around her. Something slammed into the left engine and warning lights flashed on her panel. But the A-10 kept flying. That was what it was designed to do, take damage and keep fighting. Sarah launched her Maverick missiles, targeting the vehicle concentrations and weapons positions. Explosions bloomed across the compound, sending debris and bodies flying. She pulled up slightly to clear a rock outcropping, then dropped back down, still firing. The canyon widened ahead, the valley she'd seen on the map, if she could just make it that far. Then her right engine took a hit, more warning lights. The plane began to shake violently. She was losing power, losing altitude. Sarah fought the controls, trying to keep the nose up. The canyon walls flashed past on either side, just a little further. She cleared the narrow section and burst into the wider valley, but she was too low, still losing altitude. There was a mesa ahead, maybe 200 feet high. She wasn't going to clear it. At the last second, Sarah yanked the stick back and to the right, throwing the A-10 into a violent roll. The plane clipped the top of the mesa with its left wing, tearing off the tip. But the maneuver gave her just enough clearance. She was through. Behind her, the compound was a mass of flames and smoke. She'd hit them hard, but at what cost? Sarah checked her instruments. Both engines were damaged, one critically. Hydraulic pressure was dropping. Fuel was leaking. She had maybe 20 minutes of flight time left if she was lucky. And she was still 60 miles from the border. She nursed the crippled A-10 north, coaxing every bit of performance from the dying aircraft. The sun was up now, and she could see smoke trailing behind her, probably from the fuel leak. 15 minutes, 10:05. The border fence came into view. Sarah was barely maintaining altitude now, down to 500 feet and dropping. The stick felt mushy in her hands. She wasn't going to make it back to Davis. She'd be lucky to make it another 10 miles. Her radio crackled to life. Unidentified aircraft, this is Davis Air Force Base. Identify yourself. Davis, this is Iron Eagle, Sarah gasped. She was pulling 4GS just trying to keep the plane level. Inbound from mission, aircraft heavily damaged, requesting emergency landing. There was a pause, then Colonel Drake's voice. Iron Eagle, your mission was not authorized. You are ordered to eject immediately. Sarah felt a flash of cold rage. They were trying to kill her. Again. Negative, Davis. I'm bringing this bird home. You will eject, Captain. That's an order. With respect, sir, go to hell. Sarah cut the radio and focused every ounce of her skill on keeping the A-10 in the air. She could see Davis now, the runways shimmering in the morning heat. Almost there, just a little further. The right engine died completely. The plane yawed hard to the left. Sarah fought it back level, but she was dropping fast now, 300 feet, 200. She crossed the base perimeter at 50 feet, trailing smoke and fire. The runway was ahead. She was going to make it. She was actually going to. The left engine exploded. The explosion threw the A-10 into a violent spin. Sarah fought the controls with every ounce of strength she had, trying to level out. The ground rushed up at her. The runway was right there, but she was coming in too fast, too steep. At the last possible second, she pulled the nose up. The tail struck first, then the landing gear collapsed, and the A-10 belly flopped onto the runway in a shower of sparks and torn metal. Sarah was thrown forward against her harness as the plane ground along the concrete, slewing sideways. She could smell fuel and smoke. Fire. She had to get out. The plane finally stopped, half on the runway, half on the grass beside it. Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she could barely release her harness. She popped the canopy and tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't hold her. Emergency vehicles were racing toward her, sirens wailing. She saw figures running. Someone was shouting her name. Strong hands grabbed her and pulled her out of the cockpit. She stumbled down onto the concrete, legs finally giving out completely. Ray Hoskins caught her before she fell. "I got you, Captain. You're safe now." Foam covered the burning plane. Medics surrounded Sarah, checking her over. She wasn't injured, just exhausted, running on pure adrenaline. Through the crowd, she saw Colonel Drake striding toward her, his face purple with rage. "What the hell were you thinking?" he roared. "You could have killed someone bringing that wreck in here. You should have ejected when I ordered you to." Sarah tried to stand, but her legs were still shaking. Ray helped her up, keeping a steadying hand on her arm. "I completed the mission, sir," she said, her voice hoarse. "The compound is destroyed." "You destroyed an A-10 worth $12 million. And for what? An unauthorized mission, that." "Unauthorized?" Sarah's voice rose. "You and those DIA agents sent me on that mission. You knew exactly where I was going." Morrison and Burke were pushing through the crowd now, their faces carefully neutral. "Captain Mitchell is confused," Morrison said smoothly. "She was never authorized for any mission. She took that aircraft without permission." Sarah stared at them in disbelief. They were denying everything. Of course they were. That was the plan all along, send her on a suicide mission, and if by some miracle she survived, claim she'd gone rogue. "You're lying," she said flatly. "You briefed me last night. You gave me the mission parameters. You said if I succeeded, my transfer would be canceled." "I have no idea what you're talking about," Drake said. "You're clearly suffering from some kind of mental breakdown. Get her to the medical center. Now." Two MPs stepped forward, but Ray Hoskins moved between them and Sarah. "Begging your pardon, Colonel, but maybe we should hear the captain out. She just flew a damaged aircraft back from Mexico. That takes skill and guts." "That takes insanity," Drake snapped. "She stole a military aircraft and flew it into another country. That's court-martial material." A crowd was gathering, pilots, ground crew, maintenance personnel. Sarah could see their faces, some confused, some skeptical, but a few looked angry on her behalf. Tom Chen pushed to the front. "Sir, if I may, Captain Mitchell is one of the best pilots on this base. She wouldn't take a plane without authorization. Something's not adding up here." "Are you questioning my authority, Lieutenant?" "No, sir, I'm just saying." "Enough," Drake turned to the MPs. "Take Captain Mitchell into custody. She's confined to quarters pending a full investigation." The MPs hesitated, looking uncomfortable. But orders were orders. They moved toward Sarah. Then Ray Hoskins said something that stopped everyone cold. "Might want to check the maintenance logs before you do that, Colonel." Drake turned slowly. "What did you say?" "The maintenance logs, sir, for Captain Mitchell's aircraft. Someone's been tampering with them and with her plane." Ray's voice was steady, carrying across the crowd. "I found evidence of sabotage, small things that would make a pilot look incompetent or get them killed, and I documented everything." Morrison's face went pale. Burke took a step back. "You're way out of line, Sergeant," Drake said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Maybe so, sir, but I've got photos, documentation, dates, and times. Someone's been setting Captain Mitchell up for months, and I'm thinking whoever did it might not want an investigation after all." Sarah felt hope flare in her chest. Ray had evidence, real evidence that could prove what they'd done to her. "Those logs are classified," Drake said. "You had no authority to." "Actually, sir, as crew chief, I have every authority to inspect and document the condition of aircraft under my supervision. It's in the regulations. Section 12, paragraph 6. The crowd was murmuring now. Sarah could see doubt on faces that had been hostile moments before. Even some of the pilots who'd mocked her were looking at Drake with suspicion. Drake's face had gone from purple to gray. He looked at Morrison and Burke, but they were backing away, clearly wanting no part of what was coming. "This is ridiculous," Drake said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I don't know what you think you found, Sergeant, but—" "I found evidence that you tried to kill one of your own pilots," Ray said flatly. "And I'm thinking that's going to be real interesting to the Inspector General. Don't you, sir?" The silence that followed was deafening. Drake looked around at the crowd, saw the anger and disgust on their faces, and seemed to shrink. I want everyone back to their duties, now." But no one moved. They were all watching him, waiting. Finally, Tom Chen spoke up. "Colonel, I think we'd all like to hear Captain Mitchell's side of the story before anyone gets arrested." Drake looked like he wanted to argue, but he was trapped. If he tried to silence Sarah now, it would only make things worse. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "Captain Mitchell, you have 5 minutes." Sarah took a deep breath. Her legs were still shaky, but her mind was clear now. She told them everything: the meeting in Drake's office, the DIA agents, the mission briefing, the setup. She described the compound, the trap she'd flown into, the impossible odds. And she told them how she'd completed the mission anyway, because that's what soldiers did. They completed the mission, no matter the cost. When she finished, the crowd was silent. Then slowly someone started clapping. It was Lieutenant Chen. Then Ray joined in. Then more people, until the whole crowd was applauding. Drake stood alone, isolated, his career crumbling around him. "I'll be filing a full report with the Inspector General," Sarah said quietly, "about the sabotage, the unauthorized mission, and the attempt to cover it up, and I expect a full investigation into Colonel Drake's conduct." Morrison stepped forward, his face carefully composed. "Captain Mitchell, perhaps we can discuss this privately. I'm sure we can reach an understanding." "No," Sarah said firmly. "No more private discussions. No more secret deals. Everything goes through official channels from now on. And if you try to cover this up, I'll go to every news organization in the country. Let's see how the Pentagon explains sending a pilot on a suicide mission and then trying to court-martial her for surviving." Morrison's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He and Burke disappeared into the crowd, probably already calling their superiors to start damage control. Drake just stood there, defeated. "MPs," Sarah said tiredly, "I'll report to the Provost Marshal's office voluntarily. I want an official statement on record. Everything I've said here, plus anything else they want to know." The MPs looked at each other, then nodded respectfully. "Yes, ma'am, we'll escort you." As Sarah walked away, flanked by the MPs but not in custody, she caught Ray's eye. He gave her a small nod. Tom Chen saluted her, crisp and proper. Even some of the pilots who'd mocked her looked ashamed. She'd survived, not just the mission, but the betrayal that had sent her on it. But as she walked across the base in the bright Arizona sun, she knew this wasn't over. The fight was just beginning. The investigation took 3 weeks. During that time, Sarah was confined to base but not to quarters. She gave statement after statement to the Inspector General's office, to the Air Force Criminal Investigation Division, to the Judge Advocate General's Corps. She told the same story every time, clear and consistent. Ray Hoskins provided his documentation, maintenance logs showing the systematic tampering with her aircraft, photos of adjusted settings, dates that corresponded with Sarah's incidents. It was damning evidence. The investigation into Drake revealed even more. For 2 years, he'd been systematically undermining female pilots under his command. He'd falsified reports, manipulated maintenance records, and created hostile working conditions. 4 other women had transferred out or resigned because of him. Sarah had just been the most stubborn. The DIA agents, Morrison and Burke, were harder to pin down. They claimed the mission had been authorized at the highest levels as a black op to prevent a terrorist attack. But when investigators demanded to see the authorization, it didn't exist. The whole operation had been off the books. Worse, the compound Sarah had attacked hadn't been a terrorist cell at all. It had been a drug cartel's operations center. The intelligence had been fabricated to give them an excuse to take out a major cartel leader who'd been causing problems for certain people in the U.S. government. They'd used Sarah as an assassin, then planned to disavow her if things went wrong. The scandal reached all the way to Washington. 2 senators called for hearings. The Secretary of Defense promised a full review of special operations procedures, and the Air Force, desperate to avoid more bad publicity, moved quickly to contain the damage. Colonel Robert Drake was relieved of command and forced into early retirement. He'd face no criminal charges. The Air Force wanted this handled quietly, but his career was over. He left Davis Air Force Base in disgrace, escorted off the flight line by the same MPs who'd tried to arrest Sarah. Morrison and Burke disappeared into the intelligence bureaucracy. Sarah heard rumors they'd been reassigned to desk jobs in windowless offices somewhere in Virginia. Not enough punishment for what they'd done, but something. And Sarah. 3 weeks after her mission, she was called to a meeting at base headquarters. This time, the room was filled with generals. Her wing commander, the base commander, even a 2-star from the Pentagon. "Captain Mitchell," the general from Washington said, "please sit down." Sarah sat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She'd worn her dress uniform, ribbons and medals displayed. She looked every inch the professional officer she was. "We've completed our investigation," the general continued, "and I want to start by offering you an official apology on behalf of the United States Air Force. What happened to you was unacceptable. The sabotage, the mission, the attempted cover-up, all of it. You deserved better from us." Sarah nodded but said nothing. "We're prepared to offer you several options. First, your transfer to Ellsworth is canceled. You can remain here at Davis if you wish, with a guarantee of fair treatment and the opportunity to continue flying combat missions. Second, another general added, we can arrange a transfer to any base you choose with your preferred assignment. You've earned the right to write your own ticket. And third, the Pentagon general said, you can accept an immediate promotion to major, along with a position at Air Combat Command Headquarters, helping us develop new policies to prevent this kind of abuse from happening again. Sarah considered the options. A month ago, she would have jumped at the chance to stay at Davis to prove herself to the pilots who doubted her. But that felt small now, petty. She'd proven herself in the only way that mattered, by completing an impossible mission and surviving when everyone expected her to die. She didn't need their approval anymore. "Sir," she said slowly, "I appreciate the offers, but I'd like to propose a fourth option." The generals exchanged glances. "Go ahead, Captain." "I want to stay in the Air Force. I want to keep flying, but I also want to make sure this never happens to anyone else." Sarah leaned forward. "Make me an instructor pilot at the Fighter Weapons School. Let me train the next generation of A-10 pilots, and let me be a visible example that women belong in combat aviation, that we can fly just as well as any man." The Pentagon general smiled. It was the first genuine smile she'd seen from any of them. "I think that can be arranged, Captain, or should I say, Major Mitchell." The promotion came through the next day, along with orders to report to Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada in 30 days. The Fighter Weapons School, the Air Force's equivalent of Top Gun, was the most prestigious training command in the service. Sarah would be teaching the best of the best, and she'd be doing it as a woman, as someone who'd proven that skill and courage had nothing to do with gender. Her last week at Davis was strange. Pilots who'd mocked her now asked for her autograph. Brad Holcomb, the worst of her tormentors, actually apologized, a grudging, awkward apology, but an apology nonetheless. "I was wrong about you," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "You're a damn good pilot, maybe the best I've ever seen." Sarah just nodded. She didn't need his validation anymore, but it was nice to hear anyway. On her final day, she walked out to the hangar where her A-10 had been. The plane was still there, too badly damaged to repair, but kept as a monument to what she'd accomplished. Someone had painted a name on the nose, Iron Eagle. Ray Hoskins was there, doing what he always did, working on planes. "Going to miss having you around, Major," he said. "I'm going to miss you too, Ray. You saved my life, you know, if you hadn't documented that sabotage." "Just doing my job, ma'am," Ray smiled. Besides, I told you that first day, I've been working on planes for 23 years. I know a good pilot when I see one, and I know when someone's trying to destroy them. Sarah shook his hand, then pulled him into a hug. Thank you for everything. She drove off the base for the last time as the sun was setting, painting the Arizona sky in shades of orange and gold. In her rearview mirror, she could see the flight line, the hangars, the A-10s sitting like patient guardians. She'd left a piece of herself here, the scared, desperate woman who'd been fighting just to survive. The woman who'd needed their approval, their validation. That woman was gone. In her place was Major Sarah Mitchell, combat pilot, survivor, instructor. A woman who'd flown through hell and come back screaming vengeance. A woman who'd proven that the only limits that mattered were the ones you placed on yourself. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother. I saw the news. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. We all are. Sarah smiled and typed back, Thanks, Mom. I'm proud of me, too. As she drove toward Nevada, toward her new assignment and her new life, Sarah thought about the young women who would come after her. The pilots who'd look at her story and see possibility instead of limitation. Who'd know that they belonged in that cockpit just as much as anyone. She'd fought for that, bled for it, nearly died for it. And it was worth every moment. The road stretched out ahead of her, straight and clear under the darkening sky. Behind her, the past was fading. Ahead, the future was waiting. And Major Sarah Mitchell was ready for whatever came next. She'd earned her wings. She'd earned her place. She'd earned the right to fly. And nobody, not a colonel, not the Pentagon, not anyone, would ever take that away from her again. The A-10 might be ugly, it might be slow, it might not look like much. But when it came back from a mission, scarred and smoking but still flying, still fighting, that's when you understood what it really was. Tough, unstoppable, indestructible. Just like Sarah Mitchell. Iron Eagle. And that was a name she'd carry with pride for the rest of her life.